Okay, let's resume. You were. Okay, good. All right. During break, I was asked an interesting question, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that the difference between the sutural arbitration rules and the sutural model law. I don't think I discussed that in this class, and I think I might discuss it in some future class, but since it was raised, I want to make sure that everybody understands it. I don't want you to confuse the two. So, sutural, that's the UN Commission on International Trade, has two sets of rules. I shouldn't say that. There are two sets of different rules and models that you need not confuse. The first one is constitutional rules. Those are constitutional arbitration rules, international arbitration rules, just like ICC arbitration rules, LCIA, or CTAC arbitration rules. It is about how arbitration should be conducted. You use these when the arbitration is ad hoc. Ad hoc means it's not affiliated with any institution. It's standalone. Ad hoc, right? So you can use these laws, these rules for ad hoc arbitration. The constitutional model law is different. Model law is a model for states to adopt as their own domestic arbitration law. So if the constitution has made that available, and a lot of states have actually adopted it, I think up to 85 countries now have laws based on the constitutional model law. And the question that I was asked was, if the arbitration tribunal is seated in Hong Kong, what law governs the concept of arbitrability, the idea of arbitrability? And my answer to that was, the tribunal or the court should look at a law in Hong Kong to see if Hong Kong permits arbitrability of that particular subject matter. And again, under Article 5, as we've seen, the court that is called upon to enforce the award must also determine whether the subject matter is arbitrable under its own laws. So it's required to be arbitrable both in state A and state B. Yes?
So, within the arbitration agreement, both parties agree to the law of country C. Why not we follow their choice of agreements to the choice of law? Still stick to the law of the seats or enforcement regulation?
Yeah, very good question. So if I understood it correctly, why can't just parties select the law of state C where everything is arbitrable, right? Now that is very good because they cannot get away by doing that. So we've added one more jurisdiction. Parties are agreeing that we shall arbitrate everything, including securities laws, antitrust, family, whatever it is, as long as it's permitted under state C. And their selection of law is state C's law. The problem with the concept of arbitrability, it's not a matter for choice of law. The law is already chosen for the parties. They cannot contract out of those laws. If they come to state A, they would have no difficulty because state A permits them to, state C permits them to arbitrate everything, right? They are consistent with state A's laws. They have selected state A's laws. State A's law permits them to arbitrate everything. If they are in state A, they shall have absolutely no difficulty. The problem arises when they try to come to A, when they try to come to B, whether for enforcement of the agreement or whether it's for the enforcement of the award. Because then, state A and state B do not care about what C says about arbitrability. All they care about is whether it is permitted here, whether it is permitted here. So it applies on its own force. It does not care about the parties' agreement. That's the difference between all other grounds of invalidity and invalidity on the basis of subject matter capable of being settled by arbitration. Refers to the court's own laws, whatever it is that it is asked to do, whether the enforcement of the award or the agreement. So they cannot circumvent this by going to a jurisdiction that would have allowed them. If that's what they want to do, they need to stay in state C and not come anywhere else. Okay? Very good. Let's go back to these cases. Mitsubishi v. Solar, Supreme Court, 1985. What was their relationship? Who's the big guy? Who's the small guy? The little guy. Obviously, Mr. Bushi is the big guy. What did they do against these guys? Do you understand what exactly happened on the merits of this case? What are they complaining about? Solar is complaining about what problem? It is antitrust, right? What exactly did they do to them? Do you understand? What did they do to them?
According to the distribution agreement, they can only sell this product only within this region.
So they confine them to a particular territory. And what else do they do? You know, these distributorship agreements are really interesting. The big companies, they give you a right. You can sell our cars, but you cannot sell it outside of museum. And you must sell 50,000 of them a year. If you fail to do so, we're going to take away your distributorship right. Not only that, they give the same right to another guy to sell in Guangzhou. So they make you compete against each other. They restrict things. They make it extremely difficult for these little guys to succeed. Now, what happened in this case? What exactly did they do to violate antitrust laws? You know what antitrust laws, right? These are anti-competition laws. You cannot engage in some kind of agreement to other kind of trade. These guys were complaining about divide up the market, and they engaged in behavior that would restrict trade, and they were victims of this. Was the merits of the claim adjudicated at all in this whole thing? The whole thing that went all the way to the Supreme Court, it might have taken several years and millions of dollars in litigation. It was all about what? Did they get into the merits of whether or not the securities laws, the antitrust laws are violated or not? They did not care. It was all about procedural, right? The question being, the fundamental question being what?
Whether an antitrust claim could be arbitrated.
Exactly. Whether or not antitrust claim could be arbitrated. So why does the American company, the Puerto Rican company, why do they think that a subject matter is based on a cause of action arising out of the antitrust laws are not capable of being settled by arbitration? There was no law prior to that in the United States that said no. We had Wilco, right? It says securities laws are not arbitrable. There is no list in the United States that says subject matters such as this are not arbitrable. You don't find them anywhere. So they made an argument analogizing the securities laws claim under Wilco, right? They cited Wilco. And what are the grounds for them to be saying that antitrust laws are not arbitrary. Like cause of action arising out of those are not arbitrary. So what are the grounds? What are the claims that they're making? What's the argument they're making? Why not?
American safety doctrine.
So what do they say?
If according to FAA or Sherman Act,
That the Sherman Act is the antitrust law.
it was incorporated to arbitration because of the American safety doctrine.
Yeah, but that alone does not tell us much, right? So what do they say? Specifically, what was their argument? That, Public interest. So what does the law do, basically? Or let me simplify the question. How is the antitrust law enforced? Who enforces them? Who enforces the antitrust laws? Huh? No, like ordinarily, like in China, for instance. How is it enforced? How do they enforce it? If you violate antitrust laws, what happens to you? Huh? The government, right? It's a violation of public laws. The government will come after you. They will penalize you for violating things, right? Is that the only way that antitrust laws are enforced?
Bring us civil cost of action.
Exactly. That's the key. The injured party would have a right to claim against the violating party on the basis of violation of the antitrust laws. It's called a private right of action. Right? So, if it's something that the government must enforce, and it also gives private individuals a cause of action, how can you contract out of this thing and say it shall be decided by arbitrators? It's so important. It's public law that is designed to protect the public at large, and it's enforced in these ways. It's not a mere contractual instrument, right? So how is it capable of being settled by arbitration? That was one of the issues that they raised, right? This thing is a public law designed for a completely different purpose. Parties cannot contract out of it and relegate its decision-making to arbitrators in far-off land. The arbitration was supposed to take place where? In Japan. Exactly. Maybe Japanese arbitrators are going to be nominated and they would arbitrate a subject matter on the basis of what? The applicable law would be what? In addition to that would be another law, right? The arbitrators would be called upon to answer questions on the basis of what law? Not only that, the arbitrators would be required to resolve a dispute on the basis of the Sherman Act, American antitrust law. Right? That was the main problem. If you enforce the arbitration agreement, if you tell them that arbitration is okay, you can proceed, and the American company has a cause of action arising out of a public law, the American Antitrust Act, what is it going to do? It appears before the Japanese arbitrators and plead a cause of action predicated on the Sherman Act. That's why they say, this is not capable of being resolved by arbitration. We're supposed to resolve these issues in front of American court. This cause of action is not capable of settlement by arbitration. So that was their argument. What did the Supreme Court say? Did they agree with them? So what are they thinking? What is the Supreme Court saying about this particular issue? Number one, about Japanese arbitrators in Tokyo arbitrating a subject matter that is based on American public law. Is that not a problem? Apparently not, right? Supreme Court said, why not? Why not? Then Japanese arbitrators could actually study the Sherman Act and adjudicate a controversy on the basis of it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing in fact that could even be better because you can nominate people who know things. Right? The fact that it takes place in Tokyo, we're not bothered by it. Wilco, about that. What happens to Wilco? Oh, but you say in 1953, those types of things are not arbitrable. What's the difference between this and that? What do they say? Shirk. Does somebody say shirk, right? And they say, oh, wait a minute, but after that, we waited 20 years and we changed our mind. And in shirk, actually, in 1974, we said, if it is a truly international transaction, we cannot resolve every dispute under all laws in our own courts. How about that? This is more like shirk than Wilco. This is more like shirk than Wilco, right? They extensively cite to the shirk case. And I'd like to refer you to the last paragraph on page 489, where they say, as international trade has expanded in recent decades, so too has the use of international arbitration to resolve disputes arising in the course of that trade. If international arbitration institutions are to take a central place in the international legal order, the national courts will need to shake off the old judicial hostility to arbitration, and also their customary and understandable unwillingness to cede jurisdiction of a claim arising under domestic law to a foreign or transnational tribunal. To this extent, at least, it will be necessary for national courts to subordinate domestic notions of arbitrability to the international policy favoring commercial arbitration. Accordingly, we require this representative of the American business community to honor its bargain by holding this agreement to arbitrate enforceable in accordance with the explicit provisions of the FAA. And I tell you, this is by far the most important international arbitration decision probably in the world. Once the Supreme Court of the United States has said this, almost every time followed, because the Europeans, particularly the French, were already, were very highly pro international arbitration, and the U.S. was actually lagging behind because of the old judicial hostility. The kingdom was not very, But the Supreme Court said that America was on board, and that's it. And the growth of international arbitration since that time was just phenomenal. And they say expressly, we require this representative of the American business community to honor its commitment to its bargain. So once you've agreed to arbitrate, then you cannot complain about it. You cannot try to find some excuse to get out of that. I think there's been some kind of insect invasion taking place. But I think there's a window open somewhere or something like that.
就是美国的一个是没有用到的。
说呢，
Okay,
是
these I believe are very harmless.
是
So let's tolerate
对，
them.
它属于美国那种属性。对对对，就
啊
相当于美国的。
Okay, let's go back to the discussion. Justice Stevens dissented in this case, right? What does he tell us? Why doesn't he like the idea of sending these individuals to Japan? Because
They think that the expense to go to Japan is too high. And maybe that will provide no remedy for the Holocaust in this situation.
yeah, he seems to think that it's really not a good idea to have arbitrators resolve a subject matter based on a very important public law, which is the antitrust law, right? And here's a very key paragraph from his dissenting opinion. It's on page 491, the first paragraph. He says, awards are only reviewable for now. When the Supreme Court talked about, let's send it to Japan and see what they're going to do with it. The guarantee is when it comes back to us for enforcement, we're going to have a second look. And if it needs correction, we're going to correct it. So that they took comfort in their ability to review it once it comes back for enforcement. Right? What was the problem with that argument?
It's not very efficient because the same issue. Why not just our first place to decide is not valid? Why do we wait until the outcome coming to enforcement? Then we decide whether it is arbitrary or not. We could decide it at the first place.
It could have been decided right in the first place. But now, there is another problem with the argument, right, when they say that we would have another opportunity if the Japanese arbitrators misinterpret American antitrust laws. We would have another opportunity to review it at the enforcement stage, right? But there is a fundamental problem with that argument. What is that?
The scope of review is highly limited, and only when there is manifest disregard will the said award take place.
So yes, for one thing, Justice Stevens is saying that the nature of our review is going to be limited to manifest disregard of the law, right? And secondly, the record is not likely to be sufficient for us to be reviewing what went wrong in that proceeding, right? There is another problem also. Yes?
The enforcement may not take place.
Exactly. That's the key. The enforcement may not bring it back here. They can try to enforce it somewhere else, in Australia. So we will never have that opportunity to review. So you're taking comfort in this thing, and that's actually a misplaced comfort. That's what he says, right? And in that paragraph, he actually says that the record may not be. He says, he uses very strong language. He says, despotic decision-making of this kind is fine for parties who are willing to agree in advance to settle for a best approximation of the correct result in order to resolve quickly and inexpensively any contractual dispute that may arise in an ongoing commercial relationship. Such informality, however, is simply unacceptable when every error may have devastating consequences for important businesses in our national economy and may undermine their ability to compete in world markets. So he sees that this is beyond the two parties. It's about a broader economic problem. So because of that, he dissents respectfully, and he would have struck the arbitration agreement down and permitted the court to continue with the adjudication. So, Mr. Lucia, as I said, is a very important case. That's when the Supreme Court said, you know, these kinds of international cases, whether it involves public law, antitrust securities, we will refer it to arbitration because we may have the opportunity to review it again. Because we hold these communities, these business people, if they enter into a contract, they should just honor that contract. So if they don't want to do that, they have to be very careful from the very beginning and sign that kind of arbitration agreement. But once you've signed it, you're stuck with it. Okay. Two more cases, and then we'll be done. There is a very short case of the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, as more or less saying similar things. And more importantly, the Ruby v. Lloyd's case. So the decision in this case, because with Chinatown, is about domestic competition law. And they're basically deciding that it is arbitrary, right? If you look at the first paragraph on 493, the second half of that, community law requires that questions concerning the interpretation of the prohibition laid down in Article 85.1 of the treaty could be open to examination by national courts when asked to determine the validity of an arbitration award, and that it should be possible for those questions to be referred, if necessary, to the Court of Justice for a preliminary ruling. The answer must therefore be that a national court to which application is made for an annulment of an arbitration award must grant that application if it considers that the award in question is in fact contrary to Article 85 of the treaty, which is the antitrust section, where its domestic rules of procedure require to grant an application for annulment founded on failure to observe national rules of public policy. So if it actually violates antitrust laws of the European Union, it could be grounds for annulment. It could also be grounds for refusal of enforcement. It could also be grounds for refusal of enforcement of the arbitration agreement in a field case. So technically, it's as long as they say that it is there is the opportunity for judicial review at the very end of the process. There is a res judicata question there. It's sort of technical and very interesting. Res judicata is about finality. It serves an important policy objective, right? It brings litigation to an end. So here they also say res judicata actually protecting a more compelling public policy of order and finality. So community law does not require a national court to refrain from applying such rules, even if this is necessary in order to examine in proceedings for annulment of subsequent arbitral award, whether an agreement, which is in nature valid or not, must therefore does not require a national court to refrain from applying domestic rules of procedure according to which an interim award is made. So that is the last paragraph that I'm reading. So there is the technical procedure thing. Once it would have a kind of effect, and that's what they're saying. The more important case, obviously, is the Ruby voice case. And it's very interesting because it contains a choice of law. It brings back Mr. Bushy and his more firm 1993. So they had a choice of law clause in this agreement. What law did they select? English law. Why did they like the arbitration, and how did they want to get out of arbitration? Now, but we know by 1993, it was so obvious that Wilco was long gone, that subject matter based on security laws was considered arbitrable. Mitsubishi was decided, right? Antitrust laws are arbitrable, security laws are arbitrable. What are they talking about in this case? How did they intend to get out of all this very solidified jurisprudence on arbitrability? They were very clever. What did they do? What did they do? And how is this different from Mitsubishi, or how is this different from Wilco? I mean, a case that we raised. There was a choice of law. The law selected English law, right? So how did they frame their claim to the court? Not to go to arbitration. There is this subject matter that is the subject of the arbitration agreement. Is that all they claimed? This was a securities law based cause of action, right? What did they do, the lawyers? Yeah, this is what they did. So there's this agreement, right? This is UK law, government. This is the arbitration agreement. They say, our claim to the court does not arise out of this agreement. It is completely independent. It's a claim against this individual on the basis of U.S. securities law. And this U.S. securities law is not a part of the governing law here, because the governing law is UK law. So a cause of action arising out of law that is not a part of the rule of decision is not even covered by the arbitration agreement. So we're now prohibited from proceeding against the same party, although we have contractual relationship. If the cause of action actually arises out of somewhere, not the contract, then we can bypass the arbitration agreement. And the arbitral tribunal will not have jurisdiction over a cause of action that actually arises out of public law And to have a cause of action arise out of public law, you don't need a consent from the other guy. It's not a breach of contract claim. You know, if you buy a piece of framed painting from someone, an artist, you buy it. So you pay the money, $10,000, and the guy is very rude, and he throws it. He says, "Ah, catch." And then you try to grab it, you break it, and the painting gets torn. And then it actually cuts your finger. So you want to sue that individual, right? You sue him for how many problems? What is it first? Breach of contract. He did not deliver the item in the order that he was supposed to be storing, things like that. That's a violation of contract clause, or that he did not perform. Second? Exactly. So you would sue him for personal injury under tort law. Okay? So the tort law claim has no relationship with the breach of contract, at least in this context. If the contract that you had signed with him contained an arbitration agreement, there is no way that it could actually preclude your tort law claim in court, right? If you sue him in court for tort law violation of personal injury, he cannot say, "Oh, we have an arbitration agreement, so you must also arbitrate the personal injury," right? He cannot say that if it is limited to contractual relationships. So this is sort of what they did here. That was actually what they were trying to say. No. We are actually not suing this individual for anything that is in here. This, we know, is subject to UK law. We are proceeding against, although it is based on contract, we are saying that it's an independent violation of some kind of public law, which is the securities law of the United States. That's what they're saying in this case. Because Lloyd's is an insurance conglomerate, was selling insurance policies in all over the United States. I think you guys were in Chicago or something. They were targeting them, they were defrauding them, they were misrepresenting things. They took advantage of them. They said, okay, it's one thing that they actually broke their promise, breached their contract. But what we're suing them is for more than just mere breach of contract. These guys were engaged in violation of securities laws. We want to go to court for that and maybe arbitrate these other things arising out of contractual relationship. That was their strategy, and that's why it was legitimate in the context of, in the face of Mr. Bushy, a Shirk, and all others, you would not be thinking that if it is a securities laws case, it's done, it's gone. They've said yes, it's arbitrary. So they had to craft a cause of action that looked like it was different from these other cases that were decided. So that's why they sort of bifurcated it. The choice of law is UK law, that governs our relationship, contractual relationship. But it does not satisfy our demand on the basis of your securities law. So it's a different kind of cause of action. It's independent of that contract. The court was not exactly impressed by that clever plea. And it says on page 503, third full paragraph, the ruling names first contend that because the choice of law clause require the application of English law, the ruling names U.S. statutory claims cannot possibly be covered under the agreements. This is what I just described. It defies reason. This is what the court says. It defies reason to suggest that a plaintiff may circumvent form selection arbitration clause merely by stating claims under the law now recognized by the form selection in the agreement. They're trying to circumvent this thing. If we allow you to do this, every time that somebody thinks of some claim unrelated to that one, they're going to bring it in and get out of the arbitration agreement. That's why they use circumvent and get out of the arbitration agreement. And towards the very end of that paragraph, it says, we refuse to allow a party's solemn promise to be defeated by artful pleading. Okay, they call it artful pleading. In the absence of other considerations, the agreement to submit arbitration of the jurisdiction of the English court must be enforced, even if that agreement tacitly includes, listen to this, tacitly includes forfeiture of some claims that could have been brought in a different forum. See? They took you to the extreme. Right? This is an extremely pro-arbitration decision. Even if it means forfeiture of a cause of action based on public law, we will still enforce the arbitration agreement. That means you have, by signing the arbitration agreement, you have waived your right to a public law remedy, even under the securities laws. See? It has a far greater implication than having someone decide on behalf of the court. It's a forfeiture of a cause of action arising out of public law. That's what they're saying. Even if it tacitly includes forfeiture of some claims that could have been brought in a different form. That's what they're saying. But there is an argument that was made that, no, by the way, you cannot waive certain rights under the securities laws. They're not even waivable. That's what the other side said. Even if we wanted to waive it, let's assume that we did. But some of those things are actually not waivable. That's what they're saying right here. If it means that we've waived, that waiver is void. So they have to address that. Did we waive? Yes, you might have. Can we waive? No. The law itself does not permit waiver of certain rights. Because it's not about us, it's about the public at large. So if we have waived by agreement something that's not waivable, the waiver itself is void. See? That's what they're saying. So the court says, however, they found a fast forward to 505. Where they say, this is a big paragraph in the middle of that page and towards the very end of that. We are satisfied not only that the Ruby names have several adequate remedies in England to vindicate their substantive rights, but also that in this case, the policies of ensuring full and fair disclosure and deterring the exploitation of U.S. investors have not been circumvented or subverted. So basically, they take comfort in the fact that UK law that was selected provides more or less the same kind of remedy as the U.S. law. Now I wonder if the selected law was different and did not provide the same or adequate or similar type of remedy, if they have actually proceeded with their analysis that even if you have waived. we don't care. We have agreed to arbitration, we must go to arbitration. The question then becomes, if the law itself does not allow you to waive its own requirements, what happens to it? They seem to suggest that if you have waived it, it's waived. But in this case, alternative is provided by UK law, so you're not without remedy. Let the off-takers decide, just like Mitsubishi, and they would apply UK antitrust laws and see if you have the protection. And then, of course, eventually, you will come back to us and we will provide some remedy if the off-takers get it wrong. So these are the most important non-arbitrability cases. So the whole notion is that if the law that applies in a particular jurisdiction, whether it's the law that applies for enforcement of the award or the arbitration agreement, based on their laws, if they think that the subject matter is not arbitrable, they can refuse enforcement. And this is something that is retained by the New York Convention. The New York Convention permits the states to say these things are not arbitrable. It's okay. There's no limitation as to how long that list could be. But that list is shortening from time to time, In the United States, I think almost everything is arbitrable now. In Europe, in most places, most things are arbitrable. I think these days, the most common ones that are not arbitrable pertain to family matters, things like that. Sometimes IP franchise, things like that. But it's important to look at what is arbitrable and what is not in each jurisdiction that you're dealing with. That is basically, if a subject matter is incapable of settlement by arbitration, the consequence of that is the arbitration agreement becomes invalid. If the arbitration agreement is invalid, there shall be no arbitration. That means that the courts of whatever jurisdiction would have to dedicate the controversy. All right, I think we are out of time. We will, next time, I think we'll talk about arbitrators, I guess. That's the next topic. Oh, non-signatories. Yes. We've talked a little bit about non-signatories, but continue to read, and I think our next meeting is on Wednesday, same time. Okay, I'll see you then.